Hey guys, it's Nichole Eaton with the Rock Your Soul book and podcast, where we talk about how to hack your mindset, grow your intuition, and live your best life. You can support this podcast by subscribing, leaving a positive review, and screenshot and sharing on social media. Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Rock Your Soul podcast. I'm your host, Nichole Eaton. Today's episode, I got to sit down with mindfulness and breathwork facilitator, host of the Bare Naked Soul podcast, Leah Pardee. We talked about healing yourself through breath and through breath work, creating a practice of mindfulness, and upping your confidence. You're not going to want to miss this episode. And welcome, Leah.
Thanks so much for having me, Nichole. I'm so excited.
Now, I'm so excited, and I believe so deeply in divine timing, and you have to understand that I connected with Leah on a day that I was like, man, I really would love to learn more about breath work. I was listening to a podcast, and they were talking about breath work and just the transformation that can create, and then you reached out to me, and I was like, oh my goodness, the universe is literally conspiring to teach me more about this. So I'm so pumped to have you on.
Yeah, that is so crazy. And I'm obsessed with those synchronicities too. I believe things like that happen for a reason. So, yeah, here we are.
Well, I would love to know more about you. So I read a little bit of of your bio, and it sounds like this is not always the work you've been doing.
Yeah, I've kind of pivoted quite a bit, and I think it's like an important thing for me to share now because it's been scary. I started off about 2.5 years ago. I started a blog, and it was called Candid Confidence, and I just wanted to share about confidence and mindset, and didn't plan to make anything of it. I had a full on career working as a sales manager, and I had just gotten my MBA. And very quickly I realized the potential that the online space had, and I started an Instagram and all the things. And then I became a life coach, and I started working with people on their confidence. And yeah, one of the most challenging things has been allowing myself to evolve into what I do now. So, crazy enough, 2 years ago, I wanted to dive into breathwork as a facilitator. I almost joined a program to become a facilitator, and I didn't. I held off. I was afraid, and it's popped into my mind over the 2 years or so before I ended up doing it. But it's hard to let yourself evolve and grow whether or not you have an online business, right? It's hard to grow and change and become more spiritual when maybe you have friends and family who don't get it. Like any time that we grow and evolve and our mindset changes and we expand our mind and do new things, it comes with a lot of fear. And that has been part of my journey. But I'm so grateful that I've had the tools to unlock who I truly am and like let go of trying to be so liked and perfect and all these things, and trying to make sure everyone liked me and all of that. So yeah, thank goodness a couple months ago I finally became a breathwork facilitator and added that to what I'm doing. And yeah, so that's kind of my journey, a little bit of my journey.
Here's what I love about this the most, though, is that I think every time we begin to shift a part of our personality, even if it's not as dramatic or a big of a transition of going from MBA to somebody who does mindfulness and breath work, right? Anytime we start to shift and change within ourselves, there's not only our resistance, but there's also potentially resistance of the people who love us and the people who we value and the people who we go to when we need, when we need that support. How do you find that support within yourself if you maybe don't have that readily available, or you have people saying, why are you being so weird all of a sudden? Like, this is just a phase that you're diving into this stuff. Or they call, I had people when I was transitioning from a traditional mental health counselor to somebody who does more intuitive spiritual work that thought I'd lost my mind. I had people who were really religious pull me aside telling me I was doing the devil's work. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I had a lot of upheaval as well. How did you handle that? Like, how do you give yourself permission to become who you're meant to be and supposed to be, despite what everybody's saying?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it is part of it's doing the inner work to allow yourself to become who you really are. And then part of it also, for me, it has been having a support system. So meeting up with other like-minded souls who are on that same path and who get it. I think that's so absolutely huge, to find your people who are going to be going through the same things as you. And that's no matter what's going on in your life. If you're a new mom, or if you are whatever, finding people that are going through the same challenges. But so that's part of it, has been finding those people and in that community. And then the other part, I would say, has been building awareness. So meditation for me has been probably the biggest tool I've used for building awareness. And I've been meditating for about 2.5 years now. And after some time, you start to get to a point where you can hear the thoughts. You can like hear your thoughts, and you can hear your insecurities, and you can hear yourself saying, oh, that person probably thinks I'm crazy, or, oh, I got this negative comment. But it's separate from you. And that's the power, to me, of meditation and mindfulness, is you separate yourself from your thoughts. And it's one thing to know on a conceptual level that we are not our thoughts, but it's another thing to experience that separation. And a big part of what I use breath work to do is to teach this awareness positioning, where, in the session, I'm teaching how to like separate yourself from your thoughts. And yeah, that's probably been the number one thing that's helped me, because like, the thoughts of fear and self-doubt and insecurity are going to be there every step of the way as we grow and change and evolve. But being able to know that those thoughts aren't us is so key.
One of the books that I'm like so obsessed with is The Untethered Soul. And in that book, it talks about that so much, of being the observer of your thoughts. And it sounds like you create these practices that allow people to become the observer of their thoughts and have that awareness. For somebody who has never even heard of breath work before, how do you explain that to them?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I'm obsessed with The Untethered Soul too.
So good.
Oh,
So good.
I just gave it to one of my best friends. Have you read his other book, The Surrender Experiment?
Yes, I had like a phase where all I did all the time was Michael Singer work.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
Huge
Oh my
fan.
gosh. He's so good. So yeah, so breath work, for someone who isn't aware of it, or maybe just wants to hear a different perspective of it, essentially it's kind of an active meditation. So you're in a meditative kind of state to begin with, and you do these breathing patterns, these breathing exercises, to essentially use the breath to release stuck emotions within you. So it's pulling things out from within you, essentially kind of purging your system. That's one kind of half of it, is it taps into like emotional traumas and stuck energies and pulls them out. And then the other half is that it's actually clearing toxins from the body as well, and it's reoxygenating the system. And there's health benefits, and it helps to strengthen the respiratory system, the immune system. It supports like the cardiovascular system and how they're all connected. So there's kind of two parts. It's very, very healthy in terms of clearing out your physical body, but also for the mental health, it clears you out. So sometimes things come up, like sometimes you'll cry, sometimes you'll feel anger, like things come up because we have to feel them to release them. Things we've suppressed over time. We have a culture where we suppress. We teach children to suppress their emotions. And we've all been taught that growing up, to hide our emotions, don't bring them out, smother them in burgers and alcohol and pills and all these things. Not that those things are all inherently bad or at all bad, but we have a society where we suppress our emotions. And so breath work teaches you to feel them, to heal them, to allow them to come to the surface and be released. And yeah, that's kind of the way that I teach it, is that healing, that mental healing aspect.
This is such a beautiful practice. And if you haven't done breath work, what is your Instagram handle, so they can, in your website, just so people can connect with you real quick?
Yeah, my Instagram is It's Leah Pardee. So ITSLEAHPARDEE. And then my website is still candidconfidence.com, because I'm kind of going through a rebrand. So But yeah, you can find everything from those two.
So you're going to want to make sure to book a session. But one of the reasons that I really dig breath work is we forget to breathe. It seems like such a natural process, but our breath controls so much about our emotional state, so much about our mental state. And sometimes just breathing can bring everything down and slow all those processes down. I actually didn't even know some of those things you were saying about like the health benefits of it. But I think it's such a funny thing that works. And I think as somebody who's done psychology for a long time, as somebody who's done coaching for a long time, um, we kind of even forget and gloss over, and we're like, oh, uh, there's a big um, there's a big positivity bypass that happens a lot of times where we to just feel good all the time. And so breathwork really takes it and allows people to acknowledge, honor the emotions that don't feel good, and then release them. And I just think that's such a necessary step in all the work that we're all doing. I think that's such a necessary and important step is to create new space for future awesomeness by acknowledging, bringing up, and releasing the old stuff.
Yeah, it's definitely a thing. And a lot of people, I mean, I've heard people say that they're like against some of the positive self-help books and things because a lot of them are about, being high vibe and being grateful and all of that. But I do think that there's mostly in it, most of these teachers do have a section where they talk about and they have the intention of teaching that we don't want to suppress things. We want to like let go, and you can do that through therapy. You can do that through journaling, breath work. Like there's so many different coaching, different modalities you can use to release those suppressed things. But yeah, it's definitely an important thing to bring up, the bypassing, we don't want to just put a smiley face on everything and just pretend that there's no deep-seated negative things in there.
I think in an age of busyness and just people being constantly stimulated, that a lot of people have a really hard time even just sitting to do a meditation or sitting to focus on breathing. For somebody who is brand new to this work, where would be a good place for them to start?
Yeah, it's such a good point because I think a couple of years ago before I started meditating, I would have said, "Are you kidding me? I can't sit still for even 2, 5, 10 minutes. That's insane. It doesn't sound pleasurable. It sounds awful being alone with your thoughts. Like it's scary,
Yeah.
right?" And yeah, so I think that's the reason that a lot of people hold off. And there's also the element of resistance. Our mind creates so much resistance when we try to do breath work or meditation. It wants to stay busy and be chattering and giving us all these excuses not to do it and all these distractions. So I think the biggest thing is starting really, really, really small. Most people are not gonna start off meditating for 20 minutes a day, or at all. I think starting off with like 3 minutes in the morning or 5 minutes and just let it be enough and let it be okay. We have to remember that these are practices. It's like imagine if we were doing anything else for the first time, it would be difficult at first. We're not going to be quote good at it right away. So we have to like let it be okay that our mind's going to be bouncing around and just make it a 5 minute thing. I really like the app Headspace. It has like a nice little intro to meditation, like 10-day series. I believe they still have this. And they're really, really short starting off. So it helps you kind of get into it. I think being guided, so like a guided meditation or a guided breath work to start off is going to be a lot easier than trying to do it on your own. And like allowing it to just be fun and allowing it to be okay and not getting mad at ourselves or judging ourselves if our thoughts are jumping around. breath work does make it a lot easier to meditate too. So what it does is it actually shuts off the default mode network part of the brain, which is that chatterbox, which is that like
Mm.
constant overthinking voice that we can't, shut off. So it actually shuts off that part of the brain. And the idea then is that you do the breath work and then you go into a meditation and you're able to go deeper. You're able to have a quieter mind and be settled. So that's another one of the big things. So like I think that there's like a misconception, at least I used to think that breath work was like this advanced thing and meditation was the beginner thing, but it's actually the opposite. Breath work is the easy part. To breathe in a rhythm is easier than to try and sit there and still your mind. So starting with breath work and then going into meditation from there is a lot easier. Another app I like for beginners too is called Stop, Breathe, and Think.
Ooh.
I think having apps too, like you can probably set up notifications. It can help you kind of get into a routine with it. But yeah, I would say a beginner should start with like 3 to 5 minutes. Just do it like every morning or 3 mornings a week. And that itself can make a huge difference.
I love that you're breaking it down small for people because I think, again, people often feel like there's certain particular ways that they have to meditate that maybe they've read about and it has to be this and it has to be this length. And I love that you're breaking it down and making it totally accessible because, if you think about somebody who's going to go start running, you're not going to run the marathon the first time you go running. You're going to run a half mile and walk a half mile. And then maybe 3 days later, you do it again. And then a couple days later, maybe you add another half mile onto that. And we can do the same thing with our brains. I read this book called Frequency by Penny Pierce. Have you read that one?
I haven't.
Okay, super fascinating. But one of the things she talked about was like the brain frequencies and our receptivity to being in a meditative state and how breath gets you into those frequencies where you're actually accessing different parts of your brain. So when you're trying to overthink or solve a problem, that sometimes dropping into a breathwork state puts your brain into a frequency to receive different information.
That's
And that
amazing. That's fascinating.
it's such
Wow.
a good book. I recommend it. It's a little dense, but I think it's fascinating. Do you find that when you engage more in breathwork that you feel more connected to your intuition?
Absolutely. I think that I feel a lot more connected to intuition, inner guidance. And on top of that, just having an increased awareness, being consciously aware, being focused, and having less mental chatter that distracts you. Definitely for any creative, I almost said adventure, creative venture, creative outlet, problem solving. We all have areas of our life where we're trying to solve problems. Having less of that overthinking is just so huge. But yeah, it definitely helps you tap into intuition and like that inner guidance system that we all have.
So I have to tell you, I went to a breathwork class maybe 5 years ago I was at Soul Camp. It was this big event right outside of New York City. And it was maybe like 45 minutes long, and we're laying under this tree and breathing. And the whole time, my brain is like, why are you doing this? This isn't doing anything. And so I had all this mental chatter, and I swear to you, something totally shifted in an instant. Like I was sitting there, like talking shit in my head about this experience. And then suddenly I just felt this like release, and I felt so light. Like nothing really changed about what or how I was doing it, but it was this magical moment for me where I just felt something shift. And I don't know. I'm curious, like, what your thoughts are on that. Do a lot of people have that experience?
Um, I haven't heard too much of like that exact thing, but there's a lot of unique experiences that tend to come up. Sometimes old memories from childhood work will come up during breath work and just so many interesting things. I would imagine that that was probably perhaps at the point where your kind of default mode network was shutting down and you were entering more into like that Zen frequency. And letting go of the mental chatter maybe. But Yeah, it's like interesting because you can do the same breathing session, the same like sequence of breath, and just unique things do tend to happen, like unique experiences. It's really interesting.
There's so many like different facets of that. What would you suggest for somebody who is starting, like what type of breathing? Because even when I was doing that breathwork class, she was talking about like breathing through your nose versus breathing through your mouth. Like, what would you suggest somebody who's starting off with these 3 minutes? What would be like a starting point for somebody like that?
Yeah, well, breathing through the nose as opposed to the mouth, it tends to allow you to better enter the meditative state because if you have your mouth open, it can be a little more distracting, and also it can dry out your mouth and your throat and your lung. So I prefer to have people do it with their mouth closed and just breathing in through the nose. Um, and also the nose has filters inside of it that filter out like toxins from the air and things like that and filter the air coming in. But um, one exercise you can do, and you can do this in your 3 or 5 minute morning, meditation, or if you have trouble sleeping, I would recommend getting into a routine of just meditating a few minutes before bed every night. You can do it right in your bed. I find it much easier to meditate sitting up than I do lying down personally. But just breathing into your belly, and it's called belly breathing, right? But you're just breathing and you're kind of feeling your belly expand as you breathe. And then as you breathe out, feeling it contract. And so you're focused on that. You're just focusing on breathing right into your belly and then letting it relax. And that to be doing that, it would be difficult to also be thinking about your to-do list or how stupid this is or how, all the thoughts. So having that little focus of the belly, it's just really calming, really relaxing, and brings you a little bit like it's a beginning practice of like yogic breathing. So I would start there.
It's so cool because again, like I think we underestimate just taking a deep breath and we underestimate what that can do for our overall mindset and just the way our body's functioning. And so I know you were talking about also just that process of mindfulness. I find that a lot of my clients have just very busy brains that go just nonstop. If you could list three things that would be helpful for somebody with a super busy brain, what would that look like?
Um, I would say breathwork is going to be the number one. I would say journaling is huge, and I'm sure that you probably do journaling or teach journaling, but doing like a nice brain dump in the morning can be helpful. Just writing out, just challenging yourself to write a full page or more of just everything that's coming up, just letting out all the stressors, all the to-do list, all the things in your head, the what ifs, so that they're not kind of floating around in the head. You've put them down on paper. Um, and then just everyday mindfulness, which is essentially kind of walking through life in the present moment, which is hard, right? It's not like it's just an easy decision to make. But if you bring that mindset into your daily activities, let's say you're playing with your kids or making a cup of coffee or cooking dinner or going for a walk, whatever you're doing, or working, just just having the little intention to stay focused on the present. So if you're washing the dishes, like feeling the water on your hands, smelling any smells of soap, like just being immersed in the moment, your mind's still going to trail off. You're going to think about things and you're going to trail off into a story about, oh my God, and what if this thing happens? And shoot, did I return that email to that person? And what happened? My boss is whatever. Your mind trails off into stories, but you'll catch yourself, right? You'll catch yourself in the story land, and then you'll pull yourself back to the present moment, which is what we do in meditation essentially. So you're just bringing that element as an intention into your daily life. And you know, when my clients start to do this and they start to like shower with, sometimes they're like a busy mom and like showering's their time to themselves. And so they've made the shower their little meditation and they just try to stay present and they just like wash their body and feel the water and like smile and breathe. And then they just keep pulling themselves back from thought land. And you're just training your brain over time to stay in that present moment. And also with a sense of non-judgment, with a sense of it's okay. Yes, my mind will trail off. It's okay. I'm going to pull it back now. Like gently pulling it back. And like you gave a great example earlier about running. You're not just going to run I mean, I couldn't run 3 miles right now. I'd have to train for that. I'd have to practice. And it would be much harder for me to get to the point of running 3 straight miles if I was berating myself. And I was like, oh, here we go again. I'm going to run for half a mile. That's it. I suck. I'm so bad at this. Like, no, what if you let it be fun and okay and playful and you let yourself be a beginner? Um, yeah, I would say those three things would be like breath work, journaling. Breath work and meditation to me are kind of one. Like breath work with the intention of meditating afterwards. And then the mindfulness and the journaling probably are the three ways I would recommend.
I love that you're bringing up compassion when it comes to this work, because a lot of people create more resistance and more walls for themselves while doing the work because they're hard on themselves for not doing the work properly, and
Mm-hmm.
it's crazy how our brains tend to do that or have been programmed into that of trying to create perfection out of these types of practices. I remember a while ago, yeah, gosh, it's probably been like 6 or 7 years. I was reading a Gabby Bernstein book, and she talked about radical forgiveness. And radical forgiveness is one of those things that really helped me shift out of like creating more myself, because every time I'd start to be like, oh, Nichole, you're like, you can't, you never freaking focus when you're doing this. You never, if I went
Mm-hmm.
into that space, I'll be like, I forgive myself for that thought and for not being able to focus. And I'm shifting into compassion. And so it was kind of just like a little mantra I created for myself of like, any moment I started to create more resistance or started to get upset about not doing something right or not being fully present or whatever the case might be, I would just put my hand over my heart and say, I'm choosing to forgive myself. I'm choosing to forgive myself. I'm trying the best I can. I'm at least showing up to do the work. And that I think was a huge game changer for me when it came to starting mindfulness, because mindfulness is not what society has trained us to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh my gosh, I love that. That's so powerful and so important. And like, we're just so hard on ourselves. We're so critical of every single move we make. That is something we should be practicing letting go of for sure.
Absolutely. And I think as women, and even circling back to our original the original conversation we were having is, um as we grow and evolve and change, doing the breath work and doing the mindfulness allows some of those fears that get brought up when you're stepping into a new version of yourself to not be as overwhelming or controlling. Have you found that to be true?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think that's so important.
Let's hear a quick word from our sponsor. If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain. It's free. There's creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and many more. You can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started.
I know the other area that you talked about is you originally were writing about confidence. And I think a lot of people who are listening to this podcast could always use a little help in growing their confidence and feeling more confident. And especially people who are, and I feel like a lot of like spiritual people, light workers, helpers, healers. I think there's a lot of people kind of emerging and being called to emerge into their truth right now. Um, I'm curious if you have any just recommendations for people who are starting to connect with their truth and how they can kind of slide into that new version of themselves a little more easily.
Yeah. So originally this was my thing. I was a confidence coach, and this was like what I fully focused on, and that came from my career path. Several years ago, it was my second job after college. I started working in sales. And this particular sales job meant I would all day long, either I'd be in the office making phone call after phone call after phone call, getting rejected like 90% of the time or more, getting hung up on, getting told no in front of, other people could hear me on the phone calls. Like that was the setting. That I would be in the field. And in the field, I would be driving around, going into businesses, asking for the owner, getting rejected a lot of the time, face to face in front of people. It was a big transition to just be rejected so much. This job had like an 85% turnover rate, like it was insane. And I decided at some point, you know what, I'm going to decide that every single time that I ask the question and get rejected or whatever, I'm going to look at it as like a little, like a challenge mindset. Like I'm going to just use every single opportunity to just challenge myself and know that I'm going to grow my confidence a little bit more. I started to see it that way. And that was how I ended up growing a lot of confidence, because I just approached every single opportunity to put myself out there as, you know what, I'm just going to do this, and I'm going to let go of, like, I'm going to let it be a growth experience or whatever. And so when I started coaching on confidence and teaching on it, that's always been my number one tip. Do little things that scare you all the time. Make a challenge mindset, like develop a habit of doing the thing that feels uncomfortable. Little things, like, once again, starting small. So like maybe you go to this one restaurant all the time and you always order the same thing. Order something crazy that you have not tried yet, like do the little things where your brain says, oh no, that's not the way we normally do it. Like hear that and do the new thing anyways, practicing and practicing and practicing. And so if someone is like stepping into their truth, and maybe there's something they're afraid to talk to people about, maybe they know that people are going to give them a weird look, or they might ask questions and it's uncomfortable. Practice and like approach it with the intention of, you know what, I'm going to tell my hairdresser right now about this like weird online business I'm starting, and just see what she says. And then just practice laughing off the voice that says, I can't believe you're doing this, right? So and kind of circling back with like our whole conversation that we've had, Nichole, it's like being gentle on yourself, letting yourself be a beginner with it. Letting yourself practice with little things, and then maybe you decide to try something a lot scarier. Maybe it's going to a yoga class by yourself, or going out to lunch by yourself, something that really scares you. But pushing through, doing it anyways, feeling that fear and doing it anyways, because you're just training your brain. And over time, your brain starts to almost seek out challenges, like almost like it starts to like the challenge. It starts to remember that the world didn't end when we ordered sushi for the first time at our favorite restaurant. Like it remembers that we did these scary things and it was okay. So you're just training your brain to believe in yourself and allow yourself to do the scary things.
So when I first moved I live in South Carolina, and when I first moved to South Carolina, I ended up joining an improv class, which is honestly my worst nightmare.
Oh my God.
I'm quite like I'm pretty shy in a lot of ways, and so being silly in front of a group of people is not something I enjoy. Or, one time we had to do this improv where we made up our own language, and then somebody had to translate what we were saying. And we had to, act out. And I just remember like my cheeks were bright red, but I just stepped on stage and I did this in front of the class of like 20 people. And what I found was interesting, because I started to feel more myself in situations where I would have typically shied away, or I would be at a networking event, and instead of just gravitating towards the safe person that looks safe to talk to, I would, go put myself in the center of a group that felt more intimidating. And so I love this advice because it's such a powerful thing to get uncomfortable in your day to day, because it translates in such a beautiful way to other areas of your confidence and just, like you said, trusting yourself.
Yeah, that is such a good one. I've actually thought about doing that one because it does sound terrifying. Like that's so scary, but like it's also I like to tell people do something that's safe. Like you don't, you know what I mean? Like what's the worst case scenario? Maybe you embarrass yourself and you run out of the room and you quit. Okay, but nobody died. Like, it's safe to do things like that, even though it feels so terrifying. And that's exactly how you train your mind. You train yourself that the thoughts that say this is so scary are not necessarily like reality. Like no one's going to die, even if it feels that way. So that's like, I commend you for that. That's a good one.
It obviously shut down during COVID, and I haven't had the opportunity to go back, but I was thinking about it the other day because I was like, oh, I miss putting myself in those uncomfortable situations, which is so funny to say. I miss putting
Right.
myself in those uncomfortable situations because it really did positively impact me in other areas. The other thing I loved you talked about was intentionally almost getting rejected, like creating a different relationship with rejection by I heard somebody say get 100 rejections. So part of that is just putting yourself out there, and then instead of rejection meaning you failed or you suck or whatever the case might be that you've decided it means, it's like, oh, it's a tally, I'm closer to a yes. After 100 rejections I get a yes. And a lot of people find that when they put themselves out there with the not the intention of getting rejected, but with the different relationship with rejection, that they start getting more yeses than no's, and it opens a world up for them to just be in that space where rejection doesn't mean that you're failing, but you're also giving yourself more opportunity for yeses. And I loved that whole idea.
Yeah, that's such a good one. I feel like it's almost similar with like failure too. Like when I was starting my business, like my first couple launches completely flopped. Like lots of things I've launched have flopped. And like, you put something out there and you just don't get any responses. And you just have to, like, for me, it's been changing that relationship with failure and seeing it as like, oh, I'm going for it. Wow, look at me. I'm putting myself out there. I'm proud of myself. It doesn't matter the outcome. It matters that I'm like taking action, like messy action towards it. So I love that because it's like, yeah, going after rejection just means you're putting yourself out there and reframing it and like, yeah, like letting it be okay. Because failure and rejection is another example of like, I mean, failure could have a devastating impact depending what the failure is. If it's a launched flop with an online business, that you're not going to die. Like letting yourself acknowledge that like the worst case scenario isn't death, even though it might feel that way. And like practicing because it is kind of safe and doesn't feel safe, but it is safe. So I love that like reframe.
I think it's so important that as we're doing this work, as we're making ourselves uncomfortable, that all of this intertwines. And one of the things that I love to remind people is that all the tools are optional, and the tools that resonate the most with you, like as we're talking and you're like, ooh, I love the idea of meditation or guided meditation. Ooh, breath work kind of makes me uncomfortable. Ooh, like giving your soul permission to pick and choose what it needs, I think is such an important part of, because there are a million tools that can positively impact you. And there's a million tools that if you force them and they're not right, you're not going to have a positive experience with them.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Because, yeah, there's so many different tools, and it's not like one of them is like superior to the others. It's just what you're drawn to. I do think if we feel ourselves drawn to something, but there's a lot of fear holding us back, we should dig in. Like, okay, I keep thinking of going to this class or trying this thing, like digging into the resistance and the fear behind it. But yeah, definitely not like forcing it. Like, I'm not a going to the gym kind of a person. That does not, it's just not my thing. And like, why force it? I enjoy walking and doing yoga. That's like where I exercise. So yeah, letting your soul kind of direct you there and not forcing it, I think is huge.
One of like my personal mantras for this past month is to let it be easy. And that has been
Mm-hmm.
such a strong personal mantra of like, I'm gonna let this be easy. I'm going to do things from a place of just knowing they're working for me and knowing that everything is part of it and knowing that I always choose the right thing for myself. And so just letting the healing be easier than you thought and letting the process of diving into something new be easier than you thought. And I think coming at anything with that type of intention is such a powerful place because I think a lot of this and a lot of people who are starting maybe a business or starting to dive into mindfulness, I think that sometimes we start to tell ourselves stories about how hard it has to be or how long the process has to take. And I love creating just this cushion of ease around all of those pieces just so that you're approaching your world and your life not deciding it has to be so hard and so long and it may take years and blah blah blah, and we just give it permission to be a little easier.
I think I'm going to copy that for July because I love just having that be like the intention for the month. Because you're absolutely right. Like our mind, of course, our mind is a fear is giving us fear. Our mind is fear based. Our inner voice is fear based. It's going to try to keep us in the comfort zone. So it's going to tell us things are going to be hard, especially new things. Also, don't you kind of feel society in a sense, depending on what society means to you or what your perception is, we're kind of told things are hard. Marriage is hard. That's not a fact. Like things are just supposed to be hard and we latch onto that in our mind and then we have instead of having an intention of ease, we have a subconscious intention that things are going to be hard. And of course that shapes the outcome. So yeah, I think there's like such like a scientific element of like let it be easy as like a mantra or an intention because you're telling your brain to search for ease and search for things being easier and search for like shortcuts or ways to make things not as complicated. And I think sometimes we subconsciously do the opposite of that.
Well, and I think you're right with the society does tell us a lot of stories about what is, and even doing therapy for I started as a mental health counselor, shifted into intuitive soul therapy, and part of that transition was people would come to me and feel like, oh, therapy has to be, years and years and years if I have this level of trauma or if this has happened to me or if I'm depressed, that's just who I am and what my future is. And so I find that a lot of people have a lot of stories about what they're capable of and how long it has to take to happen and how drawn out of a process it has to be. And so even when you're approaching this breath work and approaching mindfulness, I think it's so much fun to just start to redecide that for yourself and to just shape that whole experience and process because I think it can be easier than what we make it. And like I said, I had just such a transformative breathwork experience and that we can really just allow it to be easy. I mean, breath is natural. It is the
Mm-hmm.
most natural thing we do. And so I just love the idea of giving ourselves permission to, yeah, let it be easier.
Yeah, I love that. It's so, so, so important.
This has been such a fun conversation. I think so informative for people who really just need to start that process of getting their minds under control and getting their minds into a space of ease and being the observer. I want you to remind people how they can reach you one more time.
Yeah, absolutely. I so appreciate this conversation. It's been amazing. So on Instagram, that's kind of like my hub for everything. It's Leah Pardee is the handle. My podcast is Bare Naked Soul. And yeah, that's pretty much the two places where I am the most active.
And you're offering private sessions and group work?
Yep, I do a couple of group sessions per month and then yeah, one-to-ones as well. Yep.
Awesome. You're going to want to connect with her. You're going to want to follow her. And also, I saw you're doing a retreat in Sedona. Can you let people know about your Soulscape Sedona retreat?
Yes. Oh my gosh. It's actually my first time going to Sedona and
Yay.
I've just heard for years about the energy there and the vortexes and September is supposed to be the best time of the year to go for the weather. So we're going to spend 5 nights It's a mindfulness and breathwork retreat. So every morning we're going to do breathwork and guided meditation. It's like a secluded property. So we have like a pool and you can walk to trails. It's going to be, yeah, it's going to be like very, very intimate. It's going to be all about mindfulness. So I'll be encouraging people to like leave their phone behind or at least leave social media behind for a portion of the trip. So my intention is that people will leave this retreat with more of a sense of it's okay to just be, and bringing some of that mindful awareness into their everyday life when they return.
That sounds amazing, and I might have to jump in on that because I've heard great things about Sedona as well, and it sounds like just a beautiful, getting present in the moment is such a powerful tool that we just don't do, and it sounds like this is going to be the retreat where everybody has access to find their present moment, to give themselves permission to hold compassion and to learn a little bit about themselves. So I would encourage you guys to check out that and those private sessions with Leah. And Leah, thank you so much for this conversation. It's been so much fun.
Yeah, thank you so much, Nichole. You're amazing, and I've loved this conversation.
Thank you so much for listening to the Rock Your Soul book and podcast. Take a moment to book a one-on-one session with me or purchase my trainings at NicholeEaton.com. Join the Rock Your Soul Facebook group or follow me on Instagram at NicholeEaton.xo. And if you loved this podcast, don't forget to share it. Thank you.